that Friday was the last, that was the first visit they had with Delana since she was taken, and her mother and her grandmother, her mother Jamie and her grandmother Marilyn, noticed right away Delana was sick, and begged for someone to get her to a doctor, to the hospital as soon as possible. And they were just ignored and dismissed as over emotional. I mean, I really don't know how else you act when your baby's been ripped from your arms. So they spent a weekend in hell, I'm sure, and their court date was scheduled for that Tuesday. So they probably thought that, okay, we can just hold on for a couple more days and get in front of a judge, and this whole misunderstanding will be over, because they were just beyond stressed. And that Monday, the foster thing still hadn't taken the baby in, and she was very later on during the fatality inquiry and any other kind of procedures that they had, or any kind of investigation that they had, the foster thing was very vague about what time she put Delana down, when she heard sounds, whatever. And she didn't go in and check the baby until 3:30 in the afternoon, and the baby was dead. She died. And they immediately took her to the hospital, but there was nothing that the doctor could do. Later on during none of this is in my book, by the way, but I just, the more I get to know the people, the more I realize I could write a book on Delana herself. Mm-hmm. But in my book, I just mentioned the first time I met them and the reaction I had when I met them, because this is just all part of this horror show, which is Child Protective Services. Mm-hmm. So going back to, again, this stuff is not in the book, but when the doctor took Delana's temperature, it was 32 degrees. So she'd been cold for quite some time. Why hadn't the foster thing checked her? Like how long? Anyway, Jamie and her mother have never gotten any answers, never, ever gotten any answers. Because what happened when Delana was taken to the hospital later that day and pronounced dead, the doctor at that time told whoever took her in, whether I'm not sure if it was the social worker or the foster thing or whoever, the doctor told them, contact the mother immediately, like her baby is dead. And Jamie did not find out until about 10 o'clock that night. So that is out. I mean, how difficult is it to pick up a phone? And, again, I could write a book on Delana Sullivan. Obviously, it would have to be at Jamie and her mother Marilyn's approval. And, even if I wrote a book, it wouldn't bring that baby back. Mm. So, because the next day they were supposed to be in court, and I asked these questions in my book. Mm-hmm. Okay. So they're supposed to be in court the next day. What does the judge do? Does the judge know that a perfectly healthy baby a week ago was found dead the day before? There's just so many questions. And when I first met them at a child protection forum, I couldn't listen to the story, because by then I'd been dealing with this system during our ordeal. I'd heard many stories, and I knew the trajectory of what was happening, so nobody was ever held accountable for the death of this baby. And I left the room. I couldn't listen, and I was bawling my eyes out, and I just went and sat in a stall in the bathroom, and I just shut the door. I didn't have to go, I didn't have to pee, but I just needed to shut the door, and I just needed to be alone and process what I just heard. And I wrote this in my book, and I'm like, the old Tina would have a hard time believing what she had just heard, and the new Tina didn't. Like, that's the person I became, because I know how lucky we were to have gotten our baby back, because that Delana could have been our baby. She could have been anybody's baby, but with a vague phone call and the power that they have, and how they threaten parents and intimidate parents, it's not right. And I don't understand. Like, it's just mind boggling. So yeah, I think that answers the question. I think I was a little more emotional writing other people's stories than I was with ours, because we had healed, we had processed our thoughts, we got our baby back. But I wrote this book to try to open everybody's eyes about this system and what it does do to families.
Right, because if it doesn't happen to you, then you have no idea what this is like.
No. And I think the public perception is that everybody who ends up being involved with Child Protective Services is automatically guilty. And I cannot be emphatic enough how wrong that is, because all they did with my daughter made mistakes. She's a human being. We all make mistakes. But all they seemed to do was just cherry pick only the negative things that my daughter was doing or had done, like cherry pick things even from her past, bring them up to the forefront as relevant in the future, and didn't even give her a chance. Her baby was 2 weeks old. Come on, give me a break. You can't,
how horrible.
And for the most part, everything that she was doing was fine. Like, she was just adjusting as parents do. You don't bring your baby home from the hospital and snap your fingers and voila, you're instantly a parent. It takes time. It takes, and even the skills that you develop for one child, like you had more than one child. You had a daughter and 2 sons?
Yes.
And so the skills that you develop to parent one child are not necessarily the same skills you use for a different child. You have to adjust slightly because every child has a different personality, right?
Right.
So one of the things I do bring up in my book is birth alerts, and it's starting to get a little more traction here in Canada. I don't know about the States or not, but birth alerts are like this pseudo red flag, and sometimes people don't even realize that there's a birth alert attached to them. When they go to the hospital to give birth of their baby, they automatically get flagged in the hospital system. The hospital contacts CPS, and they come there based on that phone call from the hospital and apprehend the baby. Like, it's just, and it's just very, like, it's getting a lot more traction in Canada, because there have been filings with the Supreme Court as well. There should be. I mean, it's ridiculous. You have not even given that parent a chance. And a lot of times the parent gets flagged because they were in the foster care system. And okay, whatever that experience was like, for the most part, it might not have been that great, but a lot of kids do get fostered, and they do have foster families who really try their best and love them, but then eventually they age out of foster care, as children tend to do. They grow up, and they try to make their way in life as anybody else. But to go into a hospital and not even realize that there's a birth alert on you, and then have this, and then you're right back in it again. So even if you got through that in your past, you're not even given a chance. They had a birth alert on my daughter, and we didn't find out about it until about a year after she was taken, because we applied to get all the notes and everything surrounding our case
Mhm.
as you have a right to do. You have a right to get all of the paperwork around what the government has written about you, or attached to your case. A lot of it's redacted, which is fine, but it's like a big jigsaw puzzle that you have to put together.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when and actually we actually didn't read it. It was my husband who read it, because we were just so fed up with this by
Mhm.
then, that my husband, he's the one who took the great big jigsaw puzzle with all the redacted statements, and he figured it out. But in the birth alert that they issued with regards to my unborn grandchild, and I'm not kidding when I quote this, but one bureaucrat sends an email to another bureaucrat at a hospital and literally says, the ball is in your court. The ball, I assume, is my unborn grandchild. And what, like, okay, ball's in your court. If she shows up at your hospital, like, take the baby, kind of thing. Like, this is, to them, it's just a game, and it's vile. It's sickening, and because these are innocent children that have a right. They have a God-given right to be with their biological family, and the onus should not be on families trying to prove their innocence and prove the right to be parents. The onus should be on child protection to actually have evidence and actually have reasons for ripping that child away from their family.
Mhm.
But that's not how it works.
No, and they also go over false allegations too. I'm sure you guys have that problem in Canada like we do over here.
Yes. The false allegation with my daughter was, again, going back to how people just assume once you're involved with CPS, you have your reasons. Well, we think the false allegation was that she's a meth head. Well, the social workers coerced a signature out of her, got a hold of her. We suspect it was her pH testing for her urine while she was pregnant, and the test results were coming back clean. So why are we still in court? Like, you've got
Mhm.
these test results, they're coming back clean. I think they tested once for opiates. Well, what it was determined was my daughter had accidentally taken Tylenol 3 that had codeine in it, right?
Mhm.
Well, there's
Mhm.
a way to test it, I'm sure, for long-term meth use, as opposed to, oops, shoot, I forgot. I must have taken a Tylenol 3 or something, right?
Right.
But of course, the social workers took that and just blew it out of proportion, and
Of
making me
course.
think like my daughter was an addict, right? So it's shameful. It's really quite shameful how they treat mothers and families, and how they treated me. Like, they just honestly thought that they had more rights to their grandchild than I did.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that becomes very, very clear in my book is my incredible sense of confusion and my incredible sense of frustration.
Mm.
Because, like you in your book, because you were blindsided by this, I was absolutely blindsided by it.
Mhm.
And I devote a chapter, and our friend Suzanne, is her role and how she helped us as a friend and advocate is intertwined throughout her story. Because
Mhm.
if we didn't have her, I don't know what would have happened. Like, I was just so shocked and so confused about, I thought social services was supposed to help families, and
Mhm.
I just saw no evidence of that at all. um, but yeah, so it was, I mean, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, and I do
Mhm.
hope that my book, I presented in a little more logical fashion.
Mhm.
In the course of about 6 or 7 months from when they took her until when we had that final court date, it was definitely the most stressful
How horrible.
ordeal. So but I have to back up a little bit, because I think you said in your opening statement that we represented ourselves. We didn't represent ourselves. We applied for legal aid, again, going back to Suzanne, because she had helped many single moms in Vancouver to get their babies back, and not one of them ever got their children back. But she knew what to do. She knew the steps that we needed to do. And so she was probably far more help with my daughter. Well, not probably, she was far more help with my daughter than I was, because I didn't know what to do in this, dealing with this. And we were lucky because we had Suzanne. And then when we went to court, we were lucky because the lawyer that we got was a wonderful man, and he was objective, and obviously he knows court procedures. So he was a very good representative for us in court. We were lucky because the foster couple who our baby was placed with, even though they only had her for 27 days, they were wonderful people. We could tell that, like, after a while, just coordinating visits with them, we could just tell they were wonderful people. They were taking care of our baby. And every time we would have an exchange with the visitation, they just kept saying to us, "Oh, she's such a good baby. Oh, she's just lovely. She's just better than our kids were, growing up." It's like, yep, we know, and we want her back. So, and they were just wonderful people, because I think at the end of that 27 days, the foster dad did admit, like, he didn't really understand why the baby was taken in the first place, because what they were being told by MCFD, the Ministry of Child and Family Development, so that's the CPS in the province of British Columbia, what they were being told by MCFD and what they were seeing with their own eyes, it just wasn't adding up. Like, they weren't seeing a neglectful mother or a mother on drugs or whatever. They were seeing a mother and a grandmother who were there. We were showing up for visits, and okay, what do we have to do now? Okay, how do we get our baby? Okay, what do you need from us to get the baby back? We were just trying to move forward, trying to work with them, if that's at all possible.
Yeah, is it possible? Because I mean, in some cases they'll work with you, and it seems like in most cases they don't want to work with you.
No, there's a different agenda going on, and I try to come up with some of the points in my book. Birth, like, absolutely blindsiding parents with something like birth alerts is one way that they do it. Another way is the secrecy. So because they're dealing with cases involving children, they always claim, "Oh, well, we can't talk about that because it's involving a child." And I raise this issue in my book. It's like, okay, wait a second. You've been hiding behind this veil of secrecy for how long now? You actually don't have to name the children. You don't even have to name the gender of the children. What's relevant is the age of the child and how everybody is behaving, how the parents are behaving, how the social workers are behaving, what's happening in court, what kind of the fact that there's no due diligence whatsoever. In our case, we never had an opportunity to present evidence. I mean, that to me is a big, so it's the secrecy. And then another one is, why is it there no evidentiary hearing at all? All it was the social workers presenting in court. And a lot of times they're not even sworn in. They're just talking to the judge from the courtroom about this, that, or the other thing. And this I say in my book, because all they kept doing was regurgitating the same criticisms of my daughter about this whole litany of drugs that she had used. I don't know, like, I think they added a few in there or whatever, because my daughter was absolutely furious when she saw all of these street drugs, or ecstasy, or I don't know, whatever, Molly, or whatever they call it. But they just list all these things out in the courtroom, and not once do they talk about anything good. It's all bad. I mean, if you go and cherry pick everything from somebody's past and present that as the whole picture, that's not fair. I mean, you can pretty much find dirt on everybody, right? Everybody's made mistakes. So it was just very, very one-sided. And the fact that we did not have any kind of evidentiary hearing, any opportunity at all to show the judge, look, at these are my daughter's drug tests, everything's clean, this is, these are the doctor's reports, the baby's fine, like there's, like, why are we here? There's no reason to be dragging this out. But no, nothing, we never got that opportunity at all it ever was the social workers presenting their side of the story, and they wanted to control the narrative, and they wanted to only present the negative aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just lucky that we had Suzanne. We were lucky we had a good lawyer. We were lucky that we were lucky because we didn't live in that same province. So we were lucky because I lived in another province. So I got my family out of there, and we were able to create a provincial barrier, which really helped, because there's only so much they can do.
Mm-hmm.
They can't, as far as the bureaucracy is concerned, they can't go digging around in another province's files as easily. So that was one of the signatures they were trying to get from me. And I just refused to sign. I mean, I'd already signed a 3-month TCO, which is a temporary custody order for my granddaughter, which is fine. I accept a temporary custody of her. I had already signed a supervision order over my daughter, which meant I had to supervise. I could not leave my daughter alone with her baby, which was stressful, but we did it because we just wanted to get through this and then get these people out of our lives. So when they sent me these other forms to sign, they claimed it was for funding. Well, I read through it and I'm like, oh, I don't know. First of all, it's not very much money. And second of all, in the forms, it said something like, looking for what's relevant. Well, who's deciding what's relevant? It sure as heck isn't me, because up until now, it's all been you guys. You're the ones who are all deciding, what gets presented in front of judges. So I refused to sign, and they applied pressure. They tried to get another social worker in, and that social worker actually came in again Friday afternoon. That's always seems to be when they want to do their, apply their pressure. Friday afternoon, and she actually expected my signature. I'm like, no, I get to read this. I get to consult a lawyer. I get to actually think about whether I want to sign this. So no, off you go. You're not getting my signature on this. And she was, a little forceful, but not too bad, because she knew I was right. Like, I have a right to read this. I'm not just going to sign whatever you put in front of me. Like, how ridiculous is that? So she was doing this on behalf of the BC social workers. And after we went back and forth with that for quite a few weeks. So, and then because of the holiday, Canada, we have Canada Day. I think it's on July the 1st. Yeah, which is like your 4th of July.
Right.
So I think they sent these forms out to me in June, expecting me to sign them. And I killed a week here, and then the one social worker went on holidays. So that was another week or two killed. And then, so it wasn't until the long weekend of July that they realized that day I wasn't signing them. Like, even though they had tried 2 or 3 or 4 times to get me to sign, like, I wasn't signing them. It got sent back to their office blank. I hadn't signed it. And they were done. Like, they were just done. Like, you guys are not getting this baby back. I'm not signing anything. We're going to serve out these temporary custody and supervision orders over, and then we'll go back to court if necessary, because there's no reason to be involved in our lives anymore. And they kept trying to find an angle, because after I didn't sign, then they had to go look for something else. So it was just ridiculous. Like, just the whole thing was just ridiculous. Yeah.
So in Canada, do they have licensed social workers, or are these inept case workers? Because that's what I was dealing with.
Yeah. No, I won't say, first of all, I don't really 100% know. I think each province probably has its own prerequisites that are required for social work. Mm-hmm. But I will say that I don't think the child protective social workers represent all the social workers out there.
Mhm.
There are many, many kinds of social workers. In fact, one of the women I dedicated the book to, Mrs. Grant, she was my guidance counselor at school, and she was very more so than my family, because I come from a Italian background, and so a lot of times dad was like, oh, well, or do we spend the money on educating a girl kind of thing. Anyway, I won't get into that, but so she was my guidance counselor at school, and she knew my mark. She knew I was a straight A student, so she was very influential in getting me to go on to university. But her background was social work. She was a wonderful person. The foster parent who took care of our baby, she had a background in social work. So there are far more wonderful social workers who are actually doing, I think, what they're supposed to be doing, working in the community and helping people who need help. I don't know what it is about social workers who take children away from their parents. I don't know anything about what kind of license they require, what kind of training you get to do that. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, Marianne. I do know in my book, there are two rabbit holes I just did not want to go down. One of them was the level of cruelty involved here. I just did not want to give too much emphasis on that, because I know it's there. It had to be there, because what kind of a person takes a 2-week-old baby away from a mother screaming and begging for them not to do it? But I didn't want to get into that in my book because I don't understand it. And another thing I didn't want to get into in my book was the level of hatred involved, because of, again, going back to Delana's family and the level of hatred they feel towards that woman who was supposed to be taking care of their baby. That's just never going to go away. That baby is in the ground now. She's in a grave. But I don't know. I didn't know what to do with that in my book. I did not want to emphasize that level of hatred, because that is their pain, their feelings. And again, I could write a book on Delana Sullivan, but it wouldn't, I'd have to work with Marilyn and Jamie on that, and probably talk about things that they have just tried. They probably never will heal from, but it won't bring Delana back. So, yeah.
Well, how did you come up with the title Fancy Prison?
Oh, that's a good question. My daughter, so when we were in BC, after they had taken our baby, we had gone to court. The judge just rubber stamped, everything. And we had to try to work with social services to do what they wanted. And one of the things they wanted was, of course, this supervision and temporary custody order. We had to find another place, because I could not bring my family back to Alberta and have them live with us, because we live in a building that's adults only. And 3 months would have been too long. It would have been in breach of our condominium rules. So we had to find another place. And when I was making phone calls from BC to find another apartment here in the city where we live, I would get told, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you, because I would try to be explaining from another province why I needed this place. But people were, well, no, I can't help you, kind of thing. And then one day I thought, oh, shoot, our realtor, of course, she's the one who found us our condo that we bought. And so I phoned her up, and she says, yeah, Tina, I've got 3 places, just pick one, sitting empty, just pick one. We can move in. Well, the problem was they were really expensive. It's like, yeah, we'll take it. But, but we can't afford it, but we'll figure it out, because I just needed to get my family out of there, and get them in a situation where we could start to have our baby and just live life with our baby. And so my daughter started calling it, and we didn't have a stick of furniture when we drove from BC to Alberta. It was a long trip. It seemed longer coming back. We didn't have a stick of furniture, but we had, she met us, and then I had to cash in all my retirement savings to be able to pay for this place over the next few months. And it was a beautiful place. So my daughter started to term it Fancy Prison because it was absolutely gorgeous, but which she was under supervision orders. She couldn't be left alone with her baby. And I had temporary custody of her baby. So to her, it was still, it may be nice, but it's still prison. So
Definitely. Oh, yeah, it's an excellent title.
yeah, well, that's all my daughter. So it was her, it was her tongue in cheek little back to Fancy Prison again.
How horrible to do to people. It just amazes me how CPS treats, people.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is mind boggling. And I mean, I've sat in on, the one thing about the pandemic is that this issue now, like, I mean, I'm talking to you from Edmonton in Canada. You're in Pennsylvania, I think.
Yes.
I can jump on Zoom and talk to people in Australia. And there's a network of people in England. I think they have like a Facebook page called Forced Adoptions, and they'll post pictures of babies taken from their parents, and again, being forced into adoption. So the one thing about this is that it's not just Canada, it's the States, it's Australia, it's the UK. I was recently on one in Australia, and it's the same thing, just very compassionate people who want to help families, but they just shake their heads. Like, it's just so mind-boggling what parents are put through.
It's a global problem. It's a global criminal problem. I would call it criminal.
Well, you did. You called it the RICO, and I used that in my book. You and another author, you call it the federal courts could charge them with violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, the RICO Act, which we all saw in The Godfather, but that was a movie, but this is real life,
Right.
And these are our children that are being moved around, trafficked for money, and it's government sanctioned.
It's the child trafficking. Of course, people, they should be really upset over the child trafficking than they are with anything else that's going on this earth right now, because this is our future. These are our future generations that are being broken up, and their personalities are changing because they've been put in that foster home, then they're being taken out of there and put into another foster home, and they're not, what am I trying to say? They're just accepting being treated like that. It just doesn't, I don't know, I just don't know how it's going to stop.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is, Marianne, this is impossible to put into words. I tried in my book. I think I did a good job conveying some issues in it. I didn't get to everything in it, but I didn't want to overwhelm the reader. I just really wanted to keep the story moving. But one of the things I talk about is bonding. And I think this is what you're trying to nail on with the foster homes. Bonding for, it just and my husband and I just talked about this today. It just happens. I mean, here we were the situation that my husband and I, he's my second husband, so we don't have children together. So this baby, she ended up being our baby because we bonded with her together. And it's something that is just so important for families to have that space and have that time. And I think that's what maternity leave is all about. You need to have that time to bond with your baby. And those bonds are incredibly important for the child's development in the first few years, for them to understand trust, um, and to, you know, love and trust of their parents. And that bonding, I think it keeps the children grounded as they go on through, you know, elementary school, and especially in high school. You know, that's definitely when they need to know that their mom and dad still love them, even though they're
Mhm.
acting up.
Right, right. Oh, how unfortunate. I can't imagine having a newborn taken away from me. I've never experienced that. It was bad enough when they were teens. I can't imagine a
Yeah.
newborn.
Yeah, yeah. But so we're getting some of the feedback now from my daughter's friends, because of course she's sharing the link with some of her close friends. Before we actually haven't, actually haven't come out with a price yet. I think I told you that already, at the
Mhm.
beginning of this.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it hasn't been printed to paper book yet. So we're just still sort of having conversations, and the feedback I'm hearing from my daughter is her friends are just like, they're just in shock. Like, they had no idea, because they're seeing her now as a busy mom with this busy toddler,
Mhm.
and they had no idea that she went through this, you know, with this
Mhm.
kid. It's like, well, it was not, first of all, it's not something that we talk about at dinner time, you know, because, you know,
Mhm.
eventually people get tired of hearing
Mhm.
hearing about it, how stressed we were, right? And you know, so hopefully this book just sort of gets it out of my system that, okay, this is our story, but it does have a happy ending, but this is an ongoing issue. So it doesn't just stop at my book. There are
Right.
many things that we can do to try to remedy the situation and try to help
Mhm.
families.
How soon will your book come out?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. I suspect that we'll come up with a price in the next week or two. And then I'd say, what are we at? We're at the beginning of October. I'd say by the end of October, it should be on paperback. Yeah. Available on Amazon.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's gonna open up a lot of eyes because people need to know this is going on globally.
Yes. Yeah.
Eh,
Well, one of the reviews I got said, I've only gotten a few reviews, but the link, I think you're making it available to your podcast
yes.
listeners. So
Mhm.
they can go ahead and download that link now, and do it soon, because like I said, we'll come up with a paperback price in the next week or two. So download that link right now. I think it's cheap. It's a dollar US or something like that.
Mhm.
And I know people are busy, but read a couple of chapters and just post a couple of sentences reviewing my book, my
Mhm.
writing, what you think of it on Amazon, just to get word and to create some buzz for my book out
Mhm.
there before we launch it on paperback.
Yes, I left you a review and
Oh, did you? Oh,
so yeah, you I think your book is going to be a tremendous success because people need to hear this. They can't just, you know, look at their families and say, you know, like if they're grandparents and say, "Oh, you know, our son just had a new baby, and what if CPS just walked through your door and just took this kid away based on a false accusation?"
yes, yeah.
That
So
yeah.
nobody wants to, like, my book may force people into some uncomfortable conversations, but these are conversations we need to have.
Mhm.
What if?
Definitely.
Because, and I think that the one of the reasons, there may be a variety of them, and again, I have more questions than answers here, but I think that the reason why CPS has been able to fester and perpetuate to the
Mhm.
state that it is now is that people just shut down. They don't talk about this. Well, I'm talking about this, okay?
Mhm.
This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous what we were made to go through. It wasn't necessary. It
Mhm.
is not in the best interests of the child. And the way that I see it now is that they are running a wholesale operation of sticking kids into foster care or into less than ideal circumstances, which I repeat is not in the best interest of the child, how can social workers actually do their job of finding children who truly need protection?
Mhm.
And they always claim, oh, well, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources. Of course you don't have the money. Of course you don't have the resources, because you're so busy, picking on this every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and dads and moms and grandparents, and you're just so busy filling the foster care system with children who do not need to be there. You can work with families, like truly, genuinely work with families, and
Mhm.
then once you sift through that, because right now it's just a human warehouse of
Mhm.
grief.
Oh,
Once you do that,
yes.
then maybe you can start making attempts to find the children who really truly need protection, and make this world a better place, because this is just, you
Mhm.
better be on the right side of this, because this is just wrong on so many different levels.
Mhm. Well, I know that we have a very large turnover of caseworkers over here because I think their consciences bother them. However, there are those that have worked their job 11 years, 12 years, and they thoroughly enjoy coming into your house and threatening you,
Oh,
and then making up all sorts of allegations, and they will do it. They will do it. I've seen it with my own eyes.
yeah, geez, wow. Well, you know what, I wouldn't want to be them when it's time to meet my maker, because
Mhm.
that's certainly what, if my boss asked me to do that, I'd be like, nope, I'm not taking anybody's kid. I don't care what, I don't care what you said that person did. I would, I need a little more evidence. I need to, I I don't know. I guess, social worker is not something I ever wanted to be. And that goes tenfold now. I don't think
Yeah.
it's a job that, and I don't think it's an easy job, but
Mhm.
I think that the way that they're doing it right now is just, it's not right at all. There's just no, and another thing too, I bring up in my book is that children can't vote. So why are politicians, and why is the court, why is it even a venue to decide what happens to that child? A judge gets in front, a family gets in front of a judge for what, 30 seconds,
Mm.
and they only see on paper what's involved in the child's life, and then they make a decision, slam the gavel. That's the
Mhm.
name of your podcast, right? That it's not like, it should not be in a court of law with the rapists, or I should say, sorry, um, the charged rapists
Mhm.
or the charged murderers, because that's what they're going to court for, is due process
Mhm.
with evidence to prove, and they have to be assumed guilty or assumed innocent, and then the court or the public defenders have to prove that they're guilty, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's no, again, there's no, and I address that a bit in my book too. It's because they operate in the gray areas of the law, because family court is a civil matter, but it's just, now the civil courts are just clogged up with all of these CPS cases, and it's just out of control.
It is out of control. I agree with you
Mm.
there. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Mm, no, I think I've covered some of the bullet points. I guess I
Mm.
could still talk about, um, well, I guess one chapter I did touch on, and it was kind of weird how timely it was, because I wrote this book, like I said, started writing in December, and then finished my rough draft around March. And one of the chapters that I wrote about was about Indian residential schools. And
Mm.
here in Canada, it made news at the end of May when they found 215 unmarked graves in a residential school in Kamloops, BC. So, yeah, I mean, it was just kind of weird timing that I had written about that exact topic in my book. And that chapter, I called it Time Traveling Eagle. And the premise of that was, what if, like, imagine Canada before, Indian residential schooling, and travel with this time traveling eagle back to a beautiful spring day in 18, I don't know, 26, I think.
Mm.
And so two things about that chapter, because I wrote and rewrote it several times. One thing I talk about is how maybe the indigenous cultures didn't have books. A lot of their storytelling was just through sitting around a campfire, and elders passing on their knowledge and their stories. But that isn't the case anymore. I think a lot of indigenous peoples now have gotten an education. They obviously have put in a high premium on making sure their kids go to good schools. They've gotten university degrees. In fact, here in Edmonton at the University of Alberta, there is a special law department dedicated to Indigenous legal issues. So that isn't the case anymore. And there's been many, many, many books written about residential school survivors. And so, yeah, the fact that maybe they didn't have any books back in 1826 certainly doesn't hold true now. A lot has been written about it, and they continue to explore this in a literary way on books or in news articles and in legislature and getting laws passed, that sort of thing. Another point about time traveling eagle, and because I'm a white person, I had a heck of a time finding someone who would talk about residential schools with me. And most of the time it was over the phone. So I don't even know necessarily if they could tell I was white. They were maybe a bit confused about what I was doing, which is fair enough. At sometimes when you're writing a book, you're not always 100% sure, okay, is this going to come together? But I had a hard time finding someone who would talk about residential schools because of the simple fact that many of the survivors just do not talk about it. They don't talk about it. On Canada Day, we had a different Canada Day here, whereas people were just so disgusted about the findings of unmarked graves. So after the Kamloops finding, I think there was about 700 more unmarked graves found in Saskatchewan, which is a prairie province. Yeah. So, but I think by Canada Day, people were thinking, and they were in a reflection mode. And I ended up going on Canada Day to my first ever powwow, and I quite like powwows. I mean, I've seen them on TV or heard people talking about them, but the one thing I love about powwows is how they make everyone stand in giant circles, and I think they go in like rotate according to the sun. So it's because it's very earthy, it's very elemental. And when I went to that powwow that day, I met a man, and he appeared to be my age. And by then I'd written the book, but I was still, and I know that I'd had a lot of trouble trying to find someone who I could interview about residential schools. But I just, casually mentioned to him, oh, you look about that, that age. Were you in residential schools? And he just told me, no, my parents were, but they never talked about it. So that was by far the reaction I got mostly about that issue, because I do dedicate a chapter to it in my book. But I don't really get into it because, again, I'm a white person. I'm not Indigenous. I didn't grow up with these stories and with these issues. And, I didn't, as far as I tried to find the common ground of schooling. And I went to an awesome Catholic school when I was growing up. And, I say in my book, every single day I could come home on the bus. It wasn't like I was missing my mom, or her cooking, because my mom was the best cook in the whole wide world. She was Italian, so she was a very, very good cook.
Yeah.
I had the best food growing up.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on. If people need to reach you or contact you, do you have contact information?
I have a website that people can contact me through that. And let's see. So one of the things I had registered a charity in Alberta called Gentle Giants. And after my book comes out, I'll kind of think about where the mission of the charity and where it's going to go. Anyway, so the website is www.gentlegiants.alberta. academia, so academia like short for education, edu.
Gotcha. And
Gotcha.
I'll
Okay.
I'll put that in the podcast notes as well. And I thank you for coming on, and I'd like to have you back on as a guest too, if you like.
Oh, well, that would be awesome. Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess we'll see how the book goes after it launches, and we'll go from there. Well, thanks so much for having me on and
Yes.
getting me prepared with the questions that you had. It was a little different. Your kids were older, it was definitely different with a 2-week-old baby, but
Mhm. Oh, I can't imagine. I cannot imagine. But, well, hey, don't jump off, okay?
oh, okay. Nope.
And okay, Slam the Gavel's a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again in the future here with Tina and other guests. Thank you so much, Tina.
Right.